Hi, I'm Marilyn Darling from Fourth Quadrant Partners, and I'm here with Cheryl Francisconi. Cheryl heads the Institute of International Education's Europe office, which she's been doing for the last 15 years. And before that, she founded IIE's Africa office in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And before that, she worked for the David and Lucille Packard Foundation for 7 years. So welcome, Cheryl. So today our purpose is to talk about a principle of emergent learning, returning learning to the system. And we're going to do this by interviewing each other. So let me set the stage first by talking a little bit about learning and how, just to remind everybody, and most of you know this, we have been thinking about learning for a very long time, but we tend to think of it in a very different way from what people normally think about as learning. We have had one framing question that has driven our work really since the very beginning, and that is this: what will it take for us to learn together around the complex work we do, as well as each of us is able to do individually?
Marilyn, I'm so delighted to be with you, and thank you for inviting me into this conversation. As you know, we met through your research on the role of emergence in complex social change, and it was my first introduction to emergent learning, if you recall. And I believe it was through that research that you came to coin the term returning learning to the system. I'm really curious, what led you to use that term?
It's a great question. It was a wonderful research project. We really enjoyed it. We came into this project with a hypothesis, which is, if groups of people, and that might be a team, it might be an organization, it might be a whole ecosystem of players, if a group of people who are trying to achieve large scale social change have a strong, clear line of sight and lots of freedom to experiment, our hypothesis was you would see adaptation, you would see emergence, you would see what we describe as a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. So for what we found was, we studied 7 cases. We put a call out to our larger community to identify possible cases where people thought they might be seeing something that you would call emergent happening. And we chose 7 cases to study. And in those cases, if sure enough, we actually saw that when there was strong line of sight, but there was not much freedom to experiment because there was an expectation that everybody would be aligned around a particular strategy, it slowed down adaptation. It made it really hard to say it's not working because everybody had committed to a particular strategy. Conversely, we saw when the floodgates were open and everybody could experiment, but there was not really clear line of sight, you'd get lots of flowers blossoming and you'd kind of get bickering. You wouldn't really necessarily get that sort of sense that we're moving towards a particular direction and we're experimenting as we go. So that was validated, which was cool, but we felt that there was something missing. And when we looked at the 7 cases, the thing that seemed to be hardest and what was really missing was a way to take all of those experiments and have them come back into the larger system and inform what happens next, so that the whole system can adapt and be working towards the goal, but using everything that's learning to get there. So that's why we coined the term returning learning to the system, which is a very specific type of learning. And we used a metaphor that we thought was really helpful that comes from complex adaptive systems theory. And that is, and Cheryl, you're familiar with this, you saw me actually demonstrate this. It's the waggle dance that a bee does when it comes back to the hive. It's found some nectar, it comes back to the hive and it says, there's nectar over here. And another bee's found nectar over here and says, there's also some over here. And all of that waggle dancing informs how bees in the hive go and find nectar, and it helps the hive thrive.
Right.
So it's just a very different way of thinking about learning. It's not a big burdensome idea. It's very simple and really fit for purpose.
Great.
So I would love to have you talk a little bit about your case, because Cheryl, your case was one of the 7 that we chose to study.
Right.
And it was in your case where we really discovered how the idea of returning learning to the system and how it works. So Cheryl, you were running a Packard Foundation leadership initiative in reproductive health. in 5 countries. And so
That's right.
I'd love to have you tell us a little bit about that initiative.
Sure. So, as you said, it was a 10-year initiative actually that was designed to build leadership at all levels, at the government level, grassroots level, civil society level, among people who are working to address very serious reproductive health challenges in their countries. The countries were India, Pakistan, and the Philippines in Asia, and Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Africa. All of these are countries where the outcomes for women are really very challenging. There's a lot of high maternal death, high maternal mortality, and high child mortality, infant mortality. And so what we were trying to do is build leadership so that people could collaborate more effectively together. We were working with over 900 leaders over the course of 10 years at all of these various levels. And one of the questions that arose about midway through the program was that Packard Foundation raised with us was, so we're investing in all these people. So what's happening? So what, is there something that they're doing together? Are they connecting to each other? And we realized we had to get more intentional about creating a community, a network, or we called it a community of practice. How could we get this group of people working more intentionally together? And so we started experimenting with a variety of different, you know, um, meeting methodologies to make that happen. Um, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as we did this, that was our framing question. What's it going to take to actually build this group of people, and that to have them work individually and collectively to address these reproductive health challenges? And I think the learning question that we lived with during the entire program was, how will we know we're making a difference? And this is something every single person like me who is in implementing programs like this, we get asked that question all the time. How do you know it's working? How do you know? And so it was important for us to track and to be aware and to continually look at what we were doing, what we were achieving, so that we could answer that question at the end and have Packard Foundation and our work really be documented as something that was successful.
So I read everything about your case, all of the reports that you produced, and one that really stuck with me was you did a participatory evaluation at the end after 10 years.
Yeah.
And in that report, and you were describing that you're talking about 5 very different countries and very different places inside of all those different countries, with in Catholic countries and Protestant countries, and
Right.
just
Muslim. Mm-hmm.
very different. Yes, and um, that's right. So in that report, you did a participatory evaluation, and in the report, what struck us, you did not have a big budget for this project. And there were 40 pages, we counted them, 40 pages of on the ground results. And all of the results were very different in different places.
That's right.
They were all about reproductive health, but it was really the leaders of different places who had decided what was needed in their place. And to us, this really just smacked of emergence. It was a beautiful example. So what do you think made possible all those different kinds of results?
Wow, it's hard to answer completely because it was potentially a variety of factors. I think that one thing that we learned is that building community between these different groups, government, civil society, and private sector, is really essential if you're going to really make a difference, because it takes the whole system in the room to actually make this kind of complex change happen. But it's also really tough because they often don't trust each other. They don't really talk to each other. They feel at odds. They don't understand each other's perspective. So that's when we started, as I said earlier, experimenting with a variety of different participatory meeting methodologies like open space technology. And we did a number of future search meetings with the whole system in the room and in all of these countries, and other things that we designed ourselves, because in most of these countries, participation isn't exactly something in the culture. You know, they would usually come together and government would talk to them about what needed to happen and throw out the indicators that needed to change and so forth. So there wasn't a lot of collaboration and cooperation amongst these groups. So it was important for us to start to create, to break down those barriers and start to create a deeper kind of conversation and understanding with each other. And so we'd started experimenting, and after every one of these events, we tried to say what was working, what was important, did we reach our goal? Were fellows engaged? Is this meeting their needs? We would also do this with them to find out, is this the kind of activity that's going to be supportive of what you need to do next? And then we would design the next event based on what we were learning. So we were kind of along the way experimenting and building that learning back into the system. I think the other thing that was important is that these were 5 very different countries, as you said earlier, and not everything worked in every country. So we couldn't use, there wasn't a cookie cutter approach. It was really very contextualized. We wanted also for the fellows themselves to own this network over time. So it was important that they were involved in sort of deciding what was the right thing. So I guess maybe you know, this continual experimentation and building learning into the system, although at the time we didn't know we were doing that because I wasn't even introduced to emergent learning till I met you later. But that, I think, may have been particularly helpful in how we were able to achieve some of these results.
Yeah, you really were doing emergent learning. It's true. And it's interesting because we really looked in our research, we were not looking for people who were doing emergent learning. We were looking for people who were creating emergence.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. So we also read in the report from fellows who said, number one, they were super grateful that you did the participatory evaluation because it's that I could hear from your description that you were doing a lot of returning learning to the system at a more local level, but across all of that whole initiative, the participatory evaluation made results visible across the whole initiative, and participants said they were very grateful to see all of that. And they also said they wish you'd done it sooner, both
Mm-hmm.
so that they could learn from each other, and also, frankly, because the money was going to go away, and this report would have helped them with fundraising, which is pretty important to a lot of people on the ground trying to do this work. So as you reflect back on the initiative, what are your sustains and improves? Are there anything you would do differently or sooner?
For sure, for sure. You know, hindsight's always the gift we wish we had earlier. We did the thing that I would sustain. We did have annual reflections with our team. So we had a country manager in each one of the countries and we worked very closely together, that team of people. So they were sharing lessons across their countries with each other and with us. And then if we were frequently reflecting on the indicators that we had we worked out with Packard Foundation at the beginning, and looking at, are the activities we're doing actually leading to the results that we were looking for in the indicators and so forth. And we made a lot of changes over the course of the several years, and we're so grateful that Packard Foundation, you know, had the flexibility to learn with us and let us make these adjustments over time. That was really, really beneficial and important. But the one thing we didn't do, as you said, was we didn't involve the entire community, all of the beneficiaries earlier. And I think once we did that and saw these 40 pages of results across the 5 countries, we realized how much we could have accelerated our outcomes and our results faster if we had done that earlier. So I wish we had done had involved them more. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge investment in a participatory evaluation like we did at the end, but it could be a lot simpler activities along the way. For example, so right now we are implementing a new program for Packard Foundation in Ethiopia, with a select group of fellows, a small group of 25 fellows in one region of the country, very similarly. And we're designing a year-long course for them. We just introduced emergent learning tools and principles last week in a training module we did. They are now using BARs and AARs and learning logs, and the response to the tools as being so practical for them and great ways for them to document their learning about what they're doing in their work was so gratifying. So we're really excited to learn with them much earlier than we did before.
That's great. Very good. Very good.
So I think I have a question for you now. And that question is, so how are you now thinking about how to support returning learning to the system?
Thank you. That's a great question. So, it, um, first of all, certainly all the tools and practices of emergent learning, just like you described, do support that work. The thing that I would say we're really thinking now is our big piece of advice for people is don't overthink it. It's
Right.
not, it doesn't have to be big and complex. You don't have to have a big plan to return learning to the system. You can keep it simple and fit for purpose and frequent. And if you do that, then you're more likely to be like the waggle dance. You help the hive more by doing that than by creating some big system to return learning to the system. It can be as simple, really, as even asking once a week, well, what did we learn this week? Literally could be just as simple as that. It can be designing meetings or conferences where you ask a question, what are we learning, as opposed to, like you were describing the meetings that people were used to in Africa, where you would sit and you'd wait for the government people to tell you what you're supposed to do. There's all sorts of opportunities to do this work, and it's just in recognizing them and asking a question. So yeah, folks who are watching this video can read more about Cheryl's reproductive health leadership initiative, the Packard Foundation initiative, on our website. If you go to our website and you download the report on the role of emergence in complex social change, it includes all 7 of the case studies, including Cheryl's. So Cheryl, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Marilyn. It's always a delight to talk about emergent learning with you and anybody else.
Thank you very much.
Okay.